Hello, everyone, and welcome to my group's GT math assignment. So we wanted to make something that was universal and that all of us could use, not dependent on our school site or city that we are at. So we just chose to focus on a school in general. So this is all about our campus. The math standards and MP standards that we focus on are geared towards second grade measurement standards. So measure the length of an object by selecting using appropriate tools, and a measure to determine how much longer one object is from another. The MP standards are to use the appropriate tools strategically and to attend to precision. The next generation science standard we chose is to develop a simple sketch or drawing or physical model to illustrate how the shape of an object helps to function as needed to solve a given problem. Science and engineering practices we chose to focus on developing and using models to develop a simple model based on evidence to represent a proposed object or tool. So a description of our GT and math activity is that students will use Google Earth to measure the length of their school, count out how many buildings there are on campus, and then compare the length of their school to a local middle and or high school, depending on how big your district is, and the number of buildings. On graph paper, the students will draw out a rough sketch of both schools using colors to represent the outer length of the school and building on campus. Through this activity, students will learn about the differences in size, measurement, and how it relates to spaces they have visited or will visit in the future. So the materials and resources students will need is either an iPad or computer that has access to Google Earth, graph paper, either physically or virtually, colored pencils and markers and crayons if you're doing the physical graph paper, the worksheets that I will show later on in the slides, and a list of middle schools in the area. If your students aren't aware, you can directly share this slideshow with your students, and by pressing on either image, it will take them directly to Google Earth or the virtual graph paper. So differentiated instruction and strategies for EL students, the worksheets will be given in both English and their native language. Visually impaired students, the images will be enlarged and the text, and we will help them in zooming into the images on Google Earth. For students with learning disability, the assignment will be organized into smaller pieces for them. For hearing impaired students, written notes and directions will be provided to them. An ASL interpreter will be present, and a video recording like this one will be provided to them with necessary subtitles. So for our 5E procedures, our first one is engage. This is where our anticipatory set will be asked and students will be interested in measurement. Engage is very important for this lesson because in second grade, this is the first time students are getting the chance to actually be involved in measuring using accurate tools that we use in our daily lives, such as a ruler, a measuring stick, a yardstick, etc. In first grade, they do not use those. They tend to use, I believe it's called invented measuring, where they usually typically use, by the end of the year, they're using paper clips to measure small objects. So this is the first time they'll be using actual units of a measuring tool. Our second one is explore, which will allow students to explore Google Earth and their school. Also very important because this is probably the first time many of the students have ever experienced Google Earth. For explain, students will have an opportunity to describe why their school is a certain size. For elaborate, students will be given a problem to solve. And lastly, for evaluate, they will be creating an image using evidence and they will have to show it to the class. So like I mentioned, for engage, it's our anticipatory set. Begin by asking the class what tools they typically use to measure objects. Depending on when you ask this during the year, like I mentioned, this might be their first time actually using a real measuring tool. Then you're going to ask them about what is typically the shape of objects they've measured in the past. It's most likely your answer is going to be either a square or a rectangle. And then from that question, ask, has anyone ever tried to measure the school, our room, our building? Obviously, I'm assuming you will get no's, and your students then will be curious about, guess I've never thought about measuring our school or even our building or our room. From there, you're going to include the concept of measuring via the online format, which you can go to Google Earth, and I will do after this slide. You'll bring up how we'll be using Google Earth to help compare the size of our campus and local middle school. For our explore, begin by instructing the students on how to use Google Earth and put in our school name, our school site in the search bar. Once you've reached the school site, allow the students to look over and count the buildings on campus. This will be the easiest first step for the students before you get them to actually measuring the length of the school. You're going to show the students the measuring tool, go over how to use it, and find the edges of the school. Once the entire school is outlined and complete, they will write out their measurement on the worksheet. Then tell the students if they make the mistake, they can just press on the measuring tool again and they can start all over. Then the students will be broken up into groups, and these groups will be given a local middle school or high school, depending on how big your district is, and they will repeat steps 1 through 3. So now we're going to go to Google Earth, and I'm going to show you exactly how this will be done. So you will, like I said, the students can press the Google Earth in a few slides over, put in their elementary school. It will take them there. Have your students count up your buildings, or since this is your school site, they can obviously go outside and count themselves, just depending on what you, the teacher, want to do. Show them measuring tool, start at one corner, go to the next corner. If you include the parking lot in one building, I highly recommend you include it for your other school campus, just so it's all continuity reasons. They will be copying down this measurement right here on their worksheet. Once they're done completing that, drawing it out, doing their buildings, counting their buildings and getting their measurement, then they can go back to the search tool, erase their elementary school, put in the middle school. It will magically take them there. Again, have them count the buildings, draw them out the best as possible. It will be a little harder for your middle schools. Start at one corner to the next, include the parking lot if you included it in the first one, go around until you're done. They will copy down this measurement, make sure they've already drawn out the school site, a rough one. It does not need to be perfect on their graph paper or their virtual paper. Like I mentioned prior, you can also press the virtual option and it will take you to something like this. It'll be clear and your students can draw out buildings and their 2 school sites and change the colors, and that if you want this lesson to be fully virtual. So for explain, in each group, the students will be begin to compare the school site to either middle school or high school. In these small groups, students will discuss whether one site is larger than another. Lastly, the groups will share their findings to the class, and it will be presented to the whole class either on a whiteboard or overhead. For elaborate, the students will be given a problem. After every group has measured the lengths of our school and their chosen middle school or high school, they will be presented with a problem. The school district wants to add 2 new buildings to each campus, one for art and the other for pottery. The 2 new buildings are both the same size and need to be close enough to each other. The students will begin working in their groups to place 2 new buildings in each other schools that they have. They will be able to draw out the school with their measurements and see how much open space is left over. If there are no reasonable space for the buildings, they need to explain why. For evaluate, students will create a visual in order to better comprehend the representation of the 2 new buildings for each school. After students have worked with Google Maps to measure the buildings in multiple schools, students will share information they found helpful, what they've learned, and any challenges they've faced. So, like I mentioned earlier, this is the worksheet I was talking about. So students will get this worksheet as they're working on their measurements for their schools, and they will put the school name, number of buildings, their measurement, comparing the 2 sites, and answering their problem. So our integration among math, science, engineering, and technology and arts. So for math, using differentiated instructions to measure the length of schools. Art, the students will use color to outline the measurements of the buildings. Science, observing, investigating, and modeling a problem that needs to be solved. Engineering, using different materials and resources to collect data in order to solve a problem. And lastly, for technology, students will be using tablets to access Google Earth to compare the 2 schools. Also, they could use computers. For our assessment enclosure, students will share in their small groups what they have found in their measurements of the 2 different school sites. They'll also restate and share their findings for the problem provided if they were able to fit 2 buildings on the school sites. After the students will complete an exit slip to complete the lesson. Here's an example of our exit slip, asking them how they, one thing they learned about Google Earth with the sentence starter. And these are our references. We hope you guys enjoyed our